A little girl halts gallery deal. That painting hides a crime. Millionaire demands full audit. Before we dive in, hit the like button if you believe kindness can change the world. Enjoy the story. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of the Hayes Gallery, casting long shadows across walls that had once echoed with laughter. 9-year-old Lena Hayes stood before an empty easel, her small fingers tracing the air where her mother's paintbrush once danced. The gallery smelled of fresh paint and possibility, but to Lena, it smelled like absence. Her father, Tyler, had poured his heart and fortune into this space, naming it after her mother, Sarah. A place where real art lives, he'd promised, but Lena felt something hollow in those words, something that made her chest tight with worry she couldn't name. The sound of expensive heels clicking against hardwood announced the arrival of Vera Lynn. Elegant, sharp-eyed, carrying herself like she owned every room she entered. Today she carried something else, a portfolio that would change everything. "Tyler, darling." Vera's voice cut through the morning quiet like silk over steel. "Wait until you see what I've brought you. Lost archives recently discovered. The investment opportunity of a lifetime." But Lena wasn't watching the adults. Her eyes had found the paintings Vera's assistants were carefully arranging. Something about them made her stomach twist. The way a discordant note makes musicians wince. Her mother had taught her to listen with her eyes to see the truth that lived in brush strokes and color choices, and these paintings were lying. The signing ceremony buzzed with the kind of anticipation that only accompanies significant financial transactions in the art world. Distinguished collectors moved through the Hayes Gallery like pilgrims approaching a shrine, their practiced eyes assessing not just the artwork but each other, measuring wealth, influence, and the delicate social dynamics that determined success in their rarefied community. Journalists from Art Review, ART News, and the cultural sections of major newspapers positioned themselves strategically, cameras ready to capture the moment that would either launch Tyler Hayes into the upper echelons of gallery ownership or document his spectacular failure. The champagne, Dom Perignon, because Vera had insisted that anything less would send the wrong message about the collection's significance, caught the gallery's carefully calibrated lighting system like tiny prisons containing liquid gold. Each glass seemed to hold not just expensive wine, but the crystallized hopes and ambitions of everyone present. Tyler stood at the temporary podium that had been erected near the gallery's central wall, his smile bright and confident in the way that successful businessmen learn to project even when their stomachs are churning with barely controlled anxiety. He'd been working toward this moment for 8 months. 8 months of negotiations, authentication processes, insurance evaluations, and the kind of careful relationship building that determined whether a new gallery would be taken seriously by the art establishment or dismissed as another wealthy dilettante's vanity project. This wasn't just about money, though the $2.3 million he was about to commit represented nearly everything he had left after establishing the gallery itself. This was about proving that the Sarah Hayes Gallery could be more than a memorial to his late wife. It could be a legitimate force in the art world, a place where significant discoveries were made and important works found their proper audience. Vera Lynn had positioned herself with strategic precision near the central painting, a haunting landscape that commanded attention from every corner of the room, like a magnetic field drawing metal filings into perfect alignment. The work depicted a European countryside scene that seemed to shift between seasons depending on the viewing angle, its techniques so masterful that several guests had already whispered comparisons to forgotten masters of the Romantic period. The price tag, discreetly placed on a small card beside the frame, read $850,000, 6 figures that made even experienced collectors pause and consider. But Vera had whispered to Tyler during their private viewing that the painting's true value was incalculable, that they were looking at a piece that could anchor a major museum collection or serve as the cornerstone of a serious private acquisition program. "The provenance documentation alone," she had murmured in that intimate tone that made business sound like seduction, "is worth more than most galleries see in a year. We're not just talking about a beautiful painting, we're talking about art history waiting to be written." Lena pressed through the crowd of adults like a small fish swimming against a powerful current, her 9-year-old frame weaving between expensive suits and designer dresses with the determination of someone on an urgent mission. The adults barely noticed her, treating her presence as an amusing accessory to the serious business of art acquisition. The gallery owner's daughter, charming in her obvious admiration for the world her father was trying to conquer. But something was wrong. Desperately, urgently, catastrophically wrong. The feeling had been building in her chest all morning, growing stronger and more insistent each time she looked at the paintings. It was like having a word on the tip of her tongue or trying to remember a song that played just out of hearing range. Familiar but elusive, important but ungraspable. Thomas Blake, the independent appraiser whose authentication had made this entire transaction possible, adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and prepared to address the assembled crowd one final time. At 39, he possessed the kind of academic credentials that opened doors in the art world. PhD in art history from Harvard, fellowships at major European museums, published research on attribution techniques that was cited by scholars. Worldwide, his reputation was more than sterling, it was unassailable. Who would question the expert judgment of someone who had authenticated pieces for the Louvre, advised the Getty on suspicious acquisitions, and written the definitive paper on detecting forgeries in 19th century landscape painting? He had prepared brief remarks about the collection's significance, comments designed to reassure any lingering doubters that they were witnessing not just a commercial transaction, but a moment of genuine cultural importance. The words were carefully chosen, professionally modulated, academically rigorous. As Tyler lifted his Mont Blanc pen, a gift from Sarah for their 5th wedding anniversary, inscribed with words that now seemed prophetic, "For writing our future, together," to sign the contract that would commit him to the largest purchase in his gallery's brief history. Lena's voice cut through the murmur of sophisticated conversations, like a church bell shattering the peace of a thunderstorm. "That painting hides a crime." The words seemed to emerge from some place deeper than conscious thought, carrying with them the accumulated weight of her mother's teaching, her own instinctive understanding of artistic truth, and the desperate urgency of someone who sees a disaster approaching and cannot remain silent. Every face in the gallery turned toward her, as if controlled by a single puppeteer. Every conversation stopped mid-sentence. Wine glasses paused halfway to lips. Camera shutters clicked frantically as photographers realized they were witnessing something far more dramatic than a routine business transaction. In the sudden, profound silence that followed her declaration, Lena's words seemed to echo off the gallery's white walls, gathering weight and power with each repetition. She stood with her small hand pointing directly at the central landscape, her glasses catching the light in a way that made her eyes seem to burn with inner fire, her expression fierce with the kind of certainty that comes not from knowledge, but from truth recognized at a cellular level. Tyler's face flushed red with embarrassment, anger, and something that might have been fear. 8 months of careful planning, professional relationships, and financial commitment were threatening to collapse because of a 9-year-old's dramatic outburst in front of the most influential people in the regional art community. "Lena, what are you?" he began, moving toward her with the intention of gently but firmly removing her from the spotlight before she could cause any more damage. "That painting hides a crime," she repeated, her voice louder this time, carrying the kind of conviction that makes adults pause despite themselves. It was her mother's voice, Tyler realized with a shock, not in tone but in absolute certainty, in the unwavering belief that truth mattered more than comfort, more than social conventions, more than the careful politeness that kept civilized society functioning smoothly. Vera's smile never wavered, but something cold and dangerous flickered in her eyes like winter lightning. "How charming," she said, her voice maintaining its cultured warmth while her gaze assessed this unexpected threat to her carefully orchestrated presentation. "Children have such vivid imaginations. It's one of the things we lose as we grow older, isn't it? The ability to see stories and mysteries in everything around us." But Lena wasn't finished, and she wasn't about to be dismissed as a fanciful child whose observations could be safely ignored by the adults conducting serious business. "My mother taught me how to see," she announced to the assembled crowd, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the gallery. She taught me that real art tells the truth, even when people don't want to hear it. And that painting, she pointed, again at the landscape that had been positioned as the crown jewel of Vera's collection, is pretending to be something it's not. The room erupted in confused murmurs, hushed conversations, and the rapid-fire clicking of camera shutters as journalists realized they were witnessing either the disruption of a major art transaction or the beginning of a much larger story. Tyler reached for his daughter, torn between paternal embarrassment and a growing unease he couldn't name but couldn't dismiss. Because Lena had her mother's eyes, and Sarah had never been wrong about art. In a world full of deception, sometimes, truth comes from the most unexpected voices. Have you ever felt that something was wrong when everyone else seemed convinced? Stay with us. This little girl's courage is about to uncover something extraordinary. That evening, after the last confused guest had departed and the gallery had returned to its natural state of contemplative quiet, Lena sat cross-legged on her bedroom floor, surrounded by her mother's art journals like an archaeologist examining precious artifacts. The leather-bound books, some thick with years of accumulated wisdom and others slender volumes devoted to specific techniques or periods, held more than just sketches and color studies. They contained Sarah's soul, her passionate engagement with the world of art, her discoveries, her theories, and most importantly, her growing awareness of the shadows that lurked behind the art world's gleaming facade. Each journal was a window into her mother's brilliant mind at work. Page after page revealed not just artistic technique, but detective work of the highest order. Careful analysis of brushstrokes, detailed comparisons of pigment compositions, meticulous documentation of provenance claims that didn't quite add up. Sarah Hayes had been more than an artist. She had been a scholar, an investigator, a guardian of artistic truth in a world where millions of dollars could change hands based on expert opinions that might be founded on elaborate lies. Mr. Wallace found her there as the grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 9 o'clock. At 71, his steps were more careful than they had been when Lena was a toddler climbing onto his lap for bedtime stories. But his mind remained as sharp as surgical steel. He had watched this remarkable little girl grow from a baby who finger-painted the walls with whatever came to hand into a 9-year-old who could identify artistic techniques that escaped the notice of adults with advanced degrees and decades of experience. "You saw something today, didn't you?" he asked gently, settling into the antique chair beside her bed that had been Sarah's favorite spot for reading to her daughter. His voice carried the kind of patient understanding that comes from a lifetime of listening more than speaking, of watching quietly, while others revealed themselves through their actions and reactions. Lena looked up at him with eyes that seemed far too old for her 9-year-old face, eyes that held the weight of knowledge she was still learning how to carry. Without a word, she opened one of her mother's journals to a page marked with urgent red ink, the kind of marking Sarah reserved for discoveries that demanded immediate attention. "Look at this, Mr. Wallace," she said, her small finger tracing her mother's careful handwriting. "Mom wrote about something called the inversion technique, how skilled forgers reverse the light source in famous paintings to make their copies harder to detect. It's like creating a mirror image of the lighting pattern, but so subtle that most people never notice the difference." She showed him her mother's meticulous notes, written in the precise script that Sarah had developed during her years of formal art education. The forger known in certain circles as the mirror consistently uses this method. In authentic works, light comes from the left side of the composition, creating shadows that fall naturally to the right. But in the forgeries attributed to this individual, shadows fall as if the light source has been moved to the opposite side. It's incredibly subtle, the kind of detail that requires trained observation and specific knowledge to detect. But once you know what to look for, it becomes a signature as distinctive as a fingerprint. Mr. Wallace leaned closer, his reading glasses sliding down his nose as he studied Sarah's documentation with the intensity it deserved. "Your mother was investigating art fraud? I knew she was passionate about authenticity, but this looks like serious research into criminal activity." "She found patterns," Lena whispered, turning pages filled with comparative photographs, detailed analysis, and increasingly urgent warnings. She was tracking someone who was copying works by old masters and selling them as recently discovered originals. Look at these notes from last spring. She documented 12 different pieces that showed up in auctions over a 2-year period, all with similar provenance stories, all with the same lighting and consistency. The evidence was methodically presented, building a case with the thoroughness of a trained prosecutor. Sarah had photographed paintings at galleries, auction houses, and private showings, always with permission, but also with a purpose that went far beyond casual admiration. She had been building a comprehensive file on what she believed was a sophisticated forgery operation. And Mr. Wallace? Lena's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might bring unwanted attention to secrets that had already proven dangerous. The painting they want Dad to buy, the one that made me feel sick when I looked at it, it uses the same technique. The shadows are wrong. They're falling like the light is coming from the right side, but the rest of the composition suggests illumination from the left. She turned to a fresh page where she had placed a photograph she'd taken secretly during the gallery event, using her small digital camera with the stealth that children master when they need to document things adults don't want them to see. Beside it was one of her mother's sketches of a landscape, dated 18 months earlier. Even in the soft illumination of her bedroom lamp, the comparison was startling once you knew where to direct your attention. The compositions were nearly identical. The same rolling hills, the same cluster of trees, the same farmhouse nestled in the valley below. But the lighting was reversed, as if someone had created the forgery by looking at Sarah's original work in a mirror and copying what they saw without understanding the fundamental error they were introducing. Mom called it the mirror's signature, Lena continued, her voice growing stronger as she recognized the importance of what she was sharing. She wrote that whoever was doing this was smart enough to fool most experts, sophisticated enough to create convincing provenance documentation, but not careful enough to hide their habitual approach to lighting. It was like a compulsion they couldn't control. They always flipped the light source, maybe because they were literally working from reversed images, or maybe because it had become so automatic that they didn't realize they were doing it. Mr. Wallace felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air filtering through the bedroom windows. He had lived long enough to recognize danger when it appeared, and Sarah's research had clearly ventured into territory where curiosity could become fatal. Lena, he said carefully, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen enough of the world to understand that some secrets killed those who discovered them. Did your mother ever confront anyone about this research? Did she share her suspicions with other experts? Or try to expose what she had found? The little girl's eyes filled with tears that had been building behind careful composure all evening. She turned to the final entry in the journal, dated just 1 week before Sarah's sudden and supposedly natural death from cardiac arrest. The last entry is from the week before she died, Lena said, her voice breaking despite her efforts to remain strong. She wrote, I know who's behind this. I have enough evidence now to prove that at least 15 major sales in the past 3 years involved forgeries created by the same hand. Tomorrow I'm going to... And then nothing. The pages torn like someone ripped out whatever came next. The incomplete sentence hung in the air between them like an accusation waiting to be spoken. Mr. Wallace studied the torn page, noting the careful way the paper had been removed, not accidentally damaged but deliberately destroyed by someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. There's something else, Lena added, reaching for another journal, this one smaller and more personal than the others. In her private diary, not the research notes, she wrote about feeling watched, about getting phone calls where no one spoke when she answered, about finding things in her studio that had been moved, just slightly, like someone had been going through her work when she wasn't there. The picture that emerged from Sarah Hayes's final weeks was one of mounting paranoia that, in retrospect, appeared to have been entirely justified. She had been closing in on something big, something worth killing for, and someone had recognized the threat she represented to their carefully constructed operation. As Mr. Wallace and Lena sat together in the growing darkness, surrounded by the evidence of Sarah's brilliance and dedication to truth. They both understood that the morning's dramatic confrontation in the gallery had been more than a child's instinctive reaction to questionable art. It had been the continuation of an investigation that had ended with murder. Sometimes the most dangerous secrets are hidden in plain sight. What happened to Sarah Hayes? Why did her investigation end so abruptly? The answers lie deeper than anyone imagined. The next morning arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that follows emotional storms, the air somehow cleaner and more honest than it had been the day before. Tyler paced his office like a caged animal, his expensive Italian leather shoes wearing a pattern in the Persian rug that Sarah had chosen during their happier days. The phone seemed to ring constantly, insurance adjusters with questions about liability, attorneys with concerns about contract obligations, board members from the gallery's founding organization who wanted explanations for why their newest acquisition had become the subject of internet speculation and art world gossip. The media attention from Lena's outburst had created ripple effects that extended far beyond the local art community. Art blogs were picking up the story, social media was buzzing with theories and speculation, and several respected journalists had already reached out requesting interviews about the authentication controversy at the Sarah Hayes Gallery. His advisors, expensive lawyers and experienced gallery managers whose opinions he had learned to trust, assured him that the situation would blow over within a week or two. Children said dramatic things at inappropriate moments. It was part of their charm and their limitation. Expert appraisers with decades of experience and international reputations didn't stake their careers on elaborate forgeries. The authentication process had been thorough, the documentation was comprehensive, and the financial investment was sound. Thomas Blake had even volunteered to conduct an additional authentication session, free of charge, to put any remaining doubts to rest once and for all. He would bring in additional experts, use more sophisticated equipment, document every aspect of the collection's provenance and physical characteristics. His reputation, built over 15 years of impeccable service to major museums and private collectors, depended on maintaining absolute standards of accuracy and integrity. But 3 floors below Tyler's anxious pacing, in the gallery space that bore his late wife's name, a very different kind of investigation was taking place. Lena and Mr. Wallace had arrived early, armed with Sarah's research journals, a high-powered magnifying glass borrowed from Tyler's desk, and the kind of determined focus that comes from knowing that truth matters more than comfort or convenience. They moved through the gallery space like detectives working a crime scene, examining every painting in Vera's collection with the methodical intensity that serious investigation requires. Each piece was analyzed not just for its obvious aesthetic qualities, but for the subtle technical details that could reveal its true origins and authenticity. "Here," Lena whispered, her small finger pointing to a seemingly innocent still life that depicted fruit arranged on a wooden table beside a ceramic vase. To casual observers, it was a charming example of traditional technique, the kind of piece that would complement any serious collection without demanding too much attention. "Look at the shadows on the apples and pears, they're too uniform, too predictable." Mom always said that real masters understood that light behaves differently on different surfaces, that the shadow cast by a round apple should be subtly different from the shadow cast by an elongated pear. She opened her mother's research journal to a page that documented the technical approaches of various historical artists. "See this analysis of how different painters handled reflected light? Each artist developed their own understanding of how light bounces between objects, creating secondary illumination that most people never notice but that trained artists incorporate almost unconsciously." Mr. Wallace studied the still life with new attention, his experienced eyes guided by Lena's insights. What had initially appeared to be skillful traditional technique now revealed itself as mechanical reproduction, technically competent but lacking the subtle irregularities that characterize genuine artistic expression. "And look at the brushstrokes on the ceramic vase," Lena continued, her voice gaining confidence as she shared the knowledge her mother had so carefully transmitted to her. "They're too regular, too predictable. Mom used to say that genuine brushwork is like handwriting. Each artist develops unconscious habits and rhythms that are as distinctive as fingerprints. But forgers often focus so hard on copying the overall appearance that they forget to incorporate the natural variations that make authentic work feel alive. They had been conducting their investigation for over 2 hours when Tyler finally emerged from his office, exhausted from arguing with lawyers and increasingly uncertain about decisions that had seemed so clear just 24 hours earlier. He found them hunched over what appeared to be a makeshift investigation board that covered half of the gallery's main floor. Photographs, notes, sketches, and detailed comparisons that transformed his elegant exhibition space into something that resembled a detective's evidence room. "What is this?" he demanded, exhaustion and frustration combining to make his voice sharper than he intended. The careful professional composure he had maintained during phone calls with attorneys and insurance representatives cracked under the weight of seeing his daughter and their family friend treating his expensive acquisition like the subject of a criminal investigation. "Dad, please just look at what we've found," Lena began, her voice carrying the urgent need to share discoveries that felt too important to ignore. "Lena, enough." Tyler's patience, stretched thin by a morning of crisis, management and damage control, finally snapped completely. Thomas Blake has authenticated these pieces 3 separate times using equipment and techniques that represent the absolute state of the art in attribution analysis. He has advanced degrees from Harvard University, experience working with the Louvre and the Metropolitan Museum, recommendations from curators and collectors whose expertise is recognized internationally. His reputation is built on 15 years of impeccable service to the art community. He gestured toward the investigation materials scattered across his gallery floor with the kind of dismissive frustration that comes from feeling overwhelmed by circumstances beyond his control. "I can't base a multi-million-dollar investment decision on the theories of a 9-year-old girl, no matter how much I love her or how much she reminds me of her mother. But Mom's research clearly shows." Lena tried again, her small voice competing against her father's mounting agitation. "Your mother is gone." The words exploded from Tyler before he could stop them, hanging in the air like a physical blow that left everyone in the gallery momentarily stunned by their brutality and finality. "She's gone, Lena. And her theories and suspicions and research died with her. I have a business to run, a future to build, employees who depend on me for their livelihoods. I can't chase shadows and conspiracy theories just because you miss her and want to feel connected to her memory." The silence that followed was profound and terrible, broken only by the soft sound of Lena's sharp intake of breath as her father's words found their target with devastating accuracy. But when she spoke again, her voice remained steady despite the tears that had begun to well in her eyes. "I don't miss her, Dad," she said with the kind of quiet dignity that sometimes emerges from deep hurt. "I remember her, and there's a difference between missing someone who's gone and carrying forward the work they left unfinished." But Tyler was no longer in a state of mind to appreciate the distinction his daughter was trying to make. The weight of financial pressure, professional obligations, and the growing realization that his dream of honoring Sarah's memory might be turning into a nightmare had pushed him beyond the point where careful listening was possible. He signed the contract that afternoon in a conference room downtown, committing $2.3 million to Vera's collection, while his attorneys shuffled papers and his accountants calculated payment schedules. The pen felt heavier than it should have as he wrote his name on documents that would determine his family's financial future for years to come. As his signature dried on the final page, creating legal obligations that would be difficult to undo, Lena stood alone in the empty gallery space and whispered a promise to the paintings that surrounded her like silent witnesses. "I won't let them erase you, Mom. I won't let them win. I won't let your work be forgotten just because it became inconvenient for adults to remember what you discovered." The commitment in her young voice carried the weight of inherited responsibility, the understanding that some battles are too important to abandon just because the odds seem impossible or the opposition too powerful to overcome. The pain of loss can blind us to the truth, but love has a way of illuminating even the darkest corners. Lena's mother left her more than memories. She left her the tools to fight for justice. The news broke 3 days later with the devastating efficiency of a wildfire, consuming everything in its path. Art blogs, financial websites, and cultural publications across the internet suddenly blazed with headlines that made Tyler's stomach clench with sick recognition. Similar collection questioned in European auction houses. Pattern of disputed attributions raises international red flags. The Mirror. Ghost forger resurfaces after 2-year silence. Each headline represented another crack in the foundation of confidence that had supported his decision to invest everything in Vera's collection. What had seemed like an isolated concern raised by an imaginative child was beginning to look like part of a much larger pattern of suspicious activity that spanned multiple countries and involved millions of dollars in questionable transactions. Lena found her father in his office at sunset, hunched over his laptop as the screen's blue glow illuminated a face that seemed to have aged years in the space of days. His eyes moved from article to article with the horrified fascination of someone watching a disaster unfold in slow motion. Each new piece of information adding weight to a growing certainty that his careful plans were collapsing around him. The European cases that were being discussed online involved paintings with characteristics that were disturbingly identical to those now hanging in his gallery. Art historians in Prague were questioning the provenance of pieces that had appeared at auction over the past 18 months. Curators in Vienna had withdrawn several works from a planned exhibition after noting inconsistencies in their documentation. A private collector in Switzerland had demanded forensic analysis of a landscape that bore suspicious resemblances to works by masters whose techniques were being systematically copied and modified. Most damning of all, investigative journalists were beginning to use a term that made Tyler's professional blood run cold: the Mirror Network. An apparently coordinated operation that involved forged documentation, bribed appraisers, and a level of sophistication that suggested extensive resources and careful planning over multiple years. Each piece that was being questioned, investigated, or withdrawn from sale had been authenticated by experts with impressive credentials. Each came with provenance documentation that appeared thorough and convincing. Each had passed initial scrutiny by curators, collectors, and institutions that were supposed to represent the highest standards of professional judgment. And each, according to the growing chorus of concerned voices in the art community, showed signs of the same technical anomaly. Lighting patterns that suggested the original artist had worked from reversed reference materials, creating shadows that fell in directions that subtly contradicted the overall composition. Vera, of course, had explanations for everything when Tyler confronted her with the mounting evidence of problems similar to those affecting his investment. These were unfounded accusations driven by professional jealousy and commercial competition. The European cases involved completely different pieces from entirely different sources. Her collection had been thoroughly vetted not just by Thomas Blake, but by a network of respected experts whose combined experience represented decades of successful attribution work. "Darling," she had said during their tense phone conversation that morning, her voice maintaining its cultured warmth despite the obvious strain of defending her professional reputation against mounting criticism. "You know how this business works. Success breeds envy, and significant discoveries always attract skeptics who would prefer that important works remain hidden rather than allow newcomers to make their mark in the market." But her reassurances felt increasingly hollow as evidence accumulated that the problems extended far beyond professional jealousy or competitive maneuvering. The financial press was beginning to take notice, with articles that questioned not just individual transactions, but the integrity of authentication processes that had allowed so many questionable pieces to enter the market simultaneously. The damage to Tyler's business was spreading with the inexorable persistence of water-finding cracks in a foundation. Potential visitors were canceling scheduled tours, citing concerns about the gallery's controversial acquisitions. Art bloggers were asking pointed questions about Tyler's due diligence processes and his relationship with galleries whose collections were now under investigation. The grand opening event, which had been scheduled for the following week and was intended to establish the Sarah Hayes Gallery as a serious presence in the regional art community, was attracting exactly the wrong kind of attention. Instead of Celebrating the discovery of important works and the launch of a new cultural institution, the art world was watching to see whether Tyler Hayes would become the latest victim of what appeared to be an elaborate confidence scheme, targeting wealthy collectors who were eager to make their mark through significant acquisitions. Tyler sat in his office as the sun disappeared behind the downtown skyline, surrounded by contracts he couldn't afford to break, and paintings he was beginning to fear were worth less than the frames that held them. The financial implications were staggering. $2.3 million represented not just his investment in the gallery, but his daughter's future, their home, and the financial security that was supposed to allow them to build new lives after Sarah's death. Lena found him there as the office grew dark, her small figure appearing in the doorway like a ghost materializing from his guilty conscience. She had been spending her afternoons at the public library, researching art fraud and reading everything she could find about authentication techniques, forgery detection, and the historical patterns that experts use to identify suspicious works. "Dad?" she said softly, her voice carrying the careful gentleness that children use when they recognize that adults are struggling with problems too big for easy solutions. He didn't look up from the laptop screen that continued to display an endless stream of bad news. "I've lost everything, Lena," he said, his voice hollow with the kind of defeat that comes from recognizing that hope was a luxury he could no longer afford. "The gallery, our home, your college fund, our entire future, it's all gone because I was too proud and too stupid to listen to a 9-year-old who saw what I was too blind to notice." She approached his desk with the careful steps of someone approaching a wounded animal, understanding instinctively that sudden movements or loud voices might trigger reactions that would hurt them both. "Not everything," she said, climbing onto the chair beside his desk and looking up at him with eyes that held more wisdom than her years should have allowed. "Yes, everything," Tyler replied, finally turning away from the screen to look at his daughter with the kind of brutal honesty that comes from hitting bottom. "Everything we had, everything we were building, everything your mother wanted us to become. It's all gone because I didn't listen to you. Because I thought I knew better than a little girl who inherited her mother's gift for seeing truth, even when it's hidden behind expensive lies." Lena climbed onto his lap with the determined affection that had always been her response to family crises, settling against his chest with the solid comfort of someone who refused to abandon ship, even when the water was rising around them. "Mom used to say that failure isn't about falling down," she said, her small voice carrying echoes of Sarah's practical wisdom and unshakable faith in the possibility of redemption. "She said failure only happens when you stay down after you've fallen, when you decide that getting back up is too hard or too scary or too likely to end in another fall." Tyler finally looked at his daughter, really looked at her, seeing past his own guilt and fear to recognize the remarkable person she was becoming despite the circumstances that had shaped her short life. In her eyes, he saw not just Sarah's artistic sensitivity, but Sarah's moral courage, her refusal to accept injustice even when fighting it seemed impossible, her unwavering belief that truth mattered more than comfort or convenience. "What do we do?" he whispered, the question carrying the weight of someone who had run out of easy answers but wasn't quite ready to surrender completely. "We prove it," Lena said with the simple clarity that sometimes emerges from absolute conviction. "We prove that the paintings are fakes. We prove that Mom was right about everything she discovered. And we prove that being small doesn't mean being powerless when you're fighting for something that matters." As they sat together in the growing darkness of the office, neither of them noticed the figure who had been watching the building from a parked car across the street for the past hour. Thomas Blake had been keeping careful track of the Hayes family's reactions to the mounting pressure, waiting to see how they would respond to evidence that their expensive investment might be worthless. He couldn't afford to let them dig any deeper into questions that might lead to answers he had worked too hard to keep buried. Some secrets he had learned were worth killing to protect, and he had already proven that he was willing to do whatever became necessary to preserve the careful structure of lies that supported his comfortable life. The stakes were about to become much higher than anyone realized. In our darkest moments, we discover who we really are. Sometimes defeat is just the beginning of our greatest victory. Stay with us. The real fight is about to begin. Mr. Wallace had been thinking about the past, the way old men do when the present becomes too complicated to bear. He sat in his apartment, surrounded by photographs and memories of the Hayes family, trying to piece together fragments that had been bothering him for months. Sarah's death had been sudden. A heart attack at 32, no warning signs, no family history. The doctors called it a tragic anomaly, one of those medical mysteries that steal bright souls without explanation. But Mr. Wallace remembered the stress she'd been under in those final weeks, the late-night phone calls, the way she'd started, looking over her shoulder. And he remembered Thomas Blake. The appraiser had visited the Hayes home several times in Sarah's final month. Ostensibly, he was consulting on some pieces Sarah was researching for a magazine article. But Mr. Wallace remembered finding him alone in Sarah's studio once, photographing her paintings with professional equipment, just documenting her technique. For the article, Thomas had explained smoothly. She asked me to catalog her work. But Sarah had never mentioned asking Thomas to photograph anything. The memory crystallized like ice forming on glass, sharp and suddenly urgent. Mr. Wallace called. "Lena, I need you to check something for me," he said without preamble. "Do you still have your mother's computer?" An hour later, Lena sat at her mother's old laptop while Mr. Wallace guided her through the process of examining file metadata. Sarah had been meticulous about documenting her work, and every digital photograph contained hidden information about when it was taken, where, and sometimes even with what equipment. "There," Mr. Wallace pointed at the screen. "That photo of your mother's landscape series. Check when it was taken." Lena's face went pale. "This says it was photographed the day before Mom died. But Dad and I were out of town visiting Grandma." "The house was empty except for Thomas Blake," Mr. Wallace finished grimly. "He had a key because your mother trusted him to check on her studio while you were away. They found more photos, all taken that same day, all of Sarah's most important pieces. But these weren't just documentation shots. They were high-resolution captures suitable for creating detailed reproductions. He wasn't just photographing Mom's work," Lena whispered, understanding dawning in her eyes. "He was stealing it, copying it." Mr. Wallace nodded. "And if your mother had discovered what he was doing, the implications hung in the air between them, too terrible to voice but impossible to ignore. Thomas Blake wasn't just authenticating forgeries. He was creating them, using Sarah's own work as templates, then selling the originals as his fakes while keeping the genuine pieces for himself. And Sarah Hayes, brilliant and observant Sarah, had figured it out. The truth often hides in the details we overlook. Sarah Hayes was closer to exposing the conspiracy than anyone realized. But truth can be dangerous when it threatens the wrong people. The gallery's grand opening was scheduled for Saturday evening. Despite the swirling controversy, Tyler had decided to proceed, partly from stubbornness, partly from financial necessity, and partly because his 9-year-old daughter had convinced him that running away never solved anything. Lena spent Friday evening in her mother's studio, which Tyler had preserved exactly as Sarah had left it. Every brush was in its place. Every sketch remained where Sarah had set it down. But tonight Lena wasn't there to remember. She was there to prepare for war. She selected 3 items: her mother's original landscape painting, the one Thomas had photographed, Sarah's detailed research journal documenting the inversion technique, and a folder of printed emails between Sarah and Thomas Blake that Mr. Wallace had helped her recover from the computer. The emails told a story of growing suspicion and mounting danger. Sarah had been planning to expose Thomas's forgery operation, and Thomas had been desperately trying to convince her to abandon her investigation. The final email, sent just hours before Sarah's fatal heart attack, was from Thomas to Sarah. "Some secrets are more dangerous than others. I hope you'll reconsider your position for everyone's sake." Saturday evening arrived with all the fanfare Tyler had dreamed of, and all the dread he now couldn't shake. The gallery buzzed with visitors, journalists, and potential buyers. Vera Lynn held court near her centerpiece painting, expertly deflecting questions about the European controversies while maintaining her elegant smile. Thomas Blake worked the room like a politician, his credentials and charm reassuring nervous collectors that their investments were sound. But they hadn't counted on a 9-year-old girl with her mother's eyes and her mother's unshakable commitment to truth. Lena waited until the speeches began, until all eyes were focused on the front of the gallery, until the cameras were recording everything for posterity. Then she walked to the center of the room, carrying her evidence like a sword. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her clear voice cutting through the adult conversation. "My name is Lena Hayes, and I want to show you something." Tyler started toward her, but something in her posture, Sarah's posture, stopped him. Lena held up her mother's original painting beside the landscape Vera was selling. Even from across the room, the differences were obvious once you knew where to look. The composition was nearly identical, but the light sources were reversed. The brushstrokes were mechanical where Sarah's were organic. The colors were flat where Sarah's held depth. "This is my mother's painting," Lena announced. "She painted it 2 years ago, and this," she pointed to Vera's centerpiece, "is a copy. But not just any copy. It's a forgery made by someone who photographed my mother's work without permission, and then murdered her to keep her quiet." The gallery erupted in shocked murmurs, but Lena wasn't finished. "Thomas Blake killed my mother because she discovered he was forging paintings using her work as templates, and now he's selling those forgeries to people like my dad, people who trust him because he has fancy degrees and a good reputation." Thomas Blake's face had gone ashen, but he recovered quickly. "This is ridiculous. A child's fantasy. Sarah Hayes died of natural causes, and these accusations are—" "Then explain this," Lena interrupted, holding up the printed emails. "Explain why you threatened my mother the day before she died. Explain why you photographed her paintings without permission. Explain why every piece in this collection uses the same inversion technique my mother documented in her research." She looked directly at Thomas, her young face fierce with inherited courage. "Explain why a 9-year-old girl can see what a Harvard-educated appraiser claims he can't. Courage doesn't always come in the size we expect. Sometimes the smallest voice carries the greatest truth. Watch what happens when justice finally finds its moment." Tyler Hayes had built his fortune by making quick decisions in high-pressure situations, but this wasn't business. This was his daughter, his late wife's legacy, and the choice between protecting his investment or protecting the truth. He looked at Lena, standing small but unshakable in the center of his gallery, surrounded by adults who were beginning to see what she had seen from the beginning. He saw Sarah in every line of Lena's face, heard Sarah's voice in every word of her accusation, and he made his choice. "Stop everything," Tyler announced, his voice carrying across the gallery. "Stop the sale, stop the exhibition, stop all of it. We're conducting a full audit of every piece in this collection." Vera Lynn's composure finally cracked. "Tyler, you can't be serious. You're going to listen to a child's wild theories over certified authentication?" "I'm going to listen to my daughter," Tyler replied, moving to stand beside Lena. "Because she sees things I've been too blind to notice." Thomas Blake made a move toward the exit, but Mr. Wallace, despite his 71 years, was faster. "I don't think so," the old man said, blocking the door. "I think the police will want to hear what we've discovered about Sarah's death." The next few hours passed in a blur of phone calls, investigations, and revelations. Art experts arrived to examine the paintings. Police officers took statements. Journalists documented everything as the conspiracy unraveled in real time. The forensic analysis confirmed what Lena had suspected. Every piece in Vera's collection showed signs of the inversion technique Sarah Hayes had documented. DNA evidence on the paintings matched samples from Thomas Blake's studio. Financial records revealed a complex money laundering operation that had been running for years. Most damning of all, the coroner agreed to re-examine Sarah's cause of death. The heart attack showed signs of induced cardiac arrest, subtle, nearly undetectable, but present once investigators knew what to look for. As dawn broke over the gallery, Tyler knelt beside his daughter in the empty space that had almost cost them everything. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm sorry I didn't listen. I'm sorry I didn't trust you. I'm sorry I almost let them win." Lena hugged him tightly, her small arms fierce with forgiveness. "Mom used to say that seeing isn't about having good eyes. It's about having an open heart. Tyler pulled back to look. At her, this remarkable child who had solved a murder, exposed a forgery ring and saved his soul in the process. What did I do to deserve you? You loved Mom, Lena said simply, and she left me here to take care of you. Love multiplies when we share it. Sarah Hayes's love for truth lives on in her daughter's courage. But this story isn't over. The best part is yet to come. 6 months later, the Hayes Gallery reopened with a very different kind of exhibition. Gone were the million-dollar forgeries and high-stakes investments. In their place hung the genuine work of Sarah Hayes, paintings that had been hidden, in storage deemed too personal for public display. But they weren't alone. Beside each of Sarah's pieces hung a smaller canvas, painted by 9-year-old hands, but guided by an inherited understanding of light, truth, and the courage to see what others miss. Lena's paintings were raw, honest, beautiful in their simplicity and powerful in their message. The centerpiece of the exhibition was a diptych titled Truth in Layers. On the left, Sarah's investigation notes recreated in paint, a detective story told in brush strokes and color. On the right, Lena's interpretation of the same story, a child's view of justice, hope, and the power of speaking truth, even when the whole world seems to be looking the other way. Mr. Wallace stood before the diptych, his aged eyes bright. With tears he wasn't ashamed to shed. Lena appeared beside him, paint still under her fingernails from her morning session in what had once been her mother's studio and was now theirs to share. "Do you think she would be proud?" Lena asked, her voice carrying the uncertainty that sometimes visits even the bravest hearts. Mr. Wallace placed his weathered hand on her shoulder, the same gesture he'd used to comfort her as a toddler, as a frightened child missing her mother, as a young detective solving an impossible case. "She's watching right now," he said softly. "And she's not just proud of what you did. She's proud of who you are. You have her eyes, Lena. You see truth, even when it's hiding. You see light even in the darkest places." Tyler approached from across the gallery, his arms full of flowers sent by supporters, investigators, and art lovers who had followed their story. The gallery was small now, more selective, focused on emerging artists and authentic work, rather than prestigious names and inflated prices. It was exactly what Sarah would have wanted. "The investigative journalist from Art Review wants to interview you again," Tyler told Lena. "She's writing a book about art fraud and wants to dedicate a chapter to how you solved the case." Lena shrugged, the way 9-year-olds do when adults make too big a deal of things that seem obvious to them. "I just looked. Mom taught me how to look." "No," Tyler corrected gently. "Your mother taught you how to see. There's a difference." As the afternoon sun slanted through the gallery windows, it illuminated the paintings in ways that revealed new details, hidden depths, layers of meaning that only emerged when the light hit them just right. Visitors moved through the space, quietly, respectfully, understanding that they were witnessing something rare. Art that mattered, truth that had been earned, love that transcended death itself. The Hayes Gallery had become what Tyler had always dreamed it could be. A place where real art lived, where truth was honored, where the light of integrity illuminated even the darkest corners of the art world. And at the heart of it all was a 9-year-old girl who had learned the most important lesson her mother could teach, that art is the light of truth, and sometimes that light shines brightest through the eyes of a child. Thomas Blake and Vera Lynn were serving federal sentences for fraud, forgery, and in Thomas's case, murder. The art world had been shaken by revelations of how extensive their operation had been, how many collectors had been fooled, how much genuine work had been replaced by sophisticated fakes. But in the Hayes Gallery, surrounded by paintings that told the truth in every brushstroke, justice felt less like revenge and more like healing. As the day drew to a close and the last visitors departed, the Hayes family, Tyler, Lena, and Mr. Wallace, who had become family through shared struggle and mutual love, stood together in the gathering dusk. "What's next?" Tyler asked his daughter, the question both practical and profound. Lena looked around at the gallery that bore her mother's name and now held her own work as well. "We keep painting," she said. We keep looking. We keep telling the truth. She paused, then added with the wisdom that sometimes visits the very young and the very old. And we keep remembering that love is the only thing that's real. Everything else is just paint on canvas. Outside, the city hummed with its usual rhythms of ambition and dreams, success and failure, truth and deception. But inside the Haze Gallery, 3 generations had found something rarer than any masterpiece. The courage to see clearly, the strength to speak truth, and the love that makes both possible. Sarah Hayes's legacy lived on, not in fame or fortune, but in her daughter's eyes, her husband's newfound wisdom, and an old man's gentle pride in a child who had saved them all by refusing to let lies masquerade as truth. The light was fading outside, but inside the gallery, illuminated by carefully placed spotlights that revealed every authentic detail of every honest painting, the truth continued to shine. And sometimes that's enough to change the world. In a world where deception often wears expensive clothes and impressive credentials, we need the courage of children like Lena Hayes, the willingness to point at the emperor's new clothes and say, "That's not real." Every day, in ways both large and small, we face moments when we must choose between comfortable lies and difficult truths, between going along with the crowd and trusting what our hearts tell us is right. Sarah Hayes gave her daughter more than artistic talent. She gave her the gift of seeing clearly, even when clarity is dangerous. That gift saved a family, exposed a conspiracy, and reminded us all that truth has its own power, its own beauty, its own light. If this story moved you, if you've ever felt like the only person in the room who could see that something was wrong, then you understand why. Stories like this matter. They remind us that courage comes in all sizes, that justice sometimes wears glasses and carries paintbrushes, and that love is stronger than any lie. Hit that like button if you believe in the power of truth. Subscribe if you want more stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. And share this with someone who needs to remember that their voice matters, no matter how small it might seem. Because sometimes the most important words in the world come from the most unexpected voices. And sometimes, just sometimes, those words are exactly what the world needs to hear. The light of truth is always shining. We just need the courage to see it, and the strength to help others see it too. What truth are you brave enough to speak today?